Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the view from the opposition. The visitors to St James's Park on Saturday are Fulham. Now I'm joined by Fulham fan Mark Wyatt. Mark, how are you doing?
Yeah, really well, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
So Mark works for our sister site down in London, Football London. So he does, I suppose he covers kind of all the clubs, and he's also had a history of covering Southampton and Brighton. I think you were on the podcast last season, and I can't remember, was it for the Brighton game perhaps? There was one of the games you've been on the Everything is Black and White podcast and provided excellent insight. But this is going to be a little bit different because you're going to provide the insight as a fan. And I tell you what, watching Fulham over the last two games, you must be rather enjoying your time as a Fulham fan.
Yeah, and let me tell you, as a Fulham fan, you take what you can get as well. So the last couple of results have been pretty much dreamland. I've been lucky enough to be at the Cottage for them as well. So to see us score 5 goals unanswered, Forest and West Ham are no mugs either, and every game in the Premier League is tough. So yeah, it's kind of on cloud 9 at the moment for those 2 games.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And I have to say, after Newcastle's week of results, the way they've conceded goals, and I know they've been away for 2 of those games, but I'm a little bit worried from a Newcastle point of view. Conceding goals against Everton and Spurs in the manner they did, and then towards the end of the game against AC Milan, obviously dumped out of Europe altogether. Their confidence is probably going to be a little bit low. They're going to be tired. They're going to be shattered. I think if you're Marco Silva, you watched last night and you're saying, hey, we can hit Newcastle here. Their mood's going to be as low as a snake's belly. And also, like I say, they're fatigued. There's a big opportunity, I think, for Fulham, not only to win potentially, but to do it in a similar style that they have done the previous 2 games. That's how down in the dumps I'm feeling about this.
Well, again, like I said, you can't get carried away as a Fulham fan. And I've been to St James's Park and I've sat up in those skies and I've seen us lose so many times at St James's Park. So I'm not going to get carried away. And it always seemed to be, there must have been a run of 3 or 4 times I went up there where it was always in the 90th minute as well. I think it was Papis Cisse that got one in the 90th minute. I think Ben Arthur got one late on as well. And it used to always happen to me. So, fingers crossed for us that we can go and get a good result. And you're right, the timings do seem quite nice. But yeah, our away form hasn't been fantastic this year in the Premier League. And Newcastle, there's still so much quality in the team. So I'm not getting carried away in any slight. I can see why people are getting a bit nervous. I think all the praise is warranted. I don't think it's a flash in the pan for Fulham. I do think we're actually looking like a really well-oiled unit now. I think Marco Silva's got this team. He'd already had it playing well last year, but there was a lot of change over the summer and stuff. So I think he's finally starting to see a lot of what he wants from this side. So there is hope. But yeah, I'm not getting carried away yet.
It was Isak, wasn't it? The last time you guys visited here, he scored in the late in the game. That was for me kind of a really important win for Newcastle because the results hadn't really been going their way, and there wasn't any pressure on Eddie Howe at all. But it felt like a game we really had to win, and he did win very late on. And you are right. Newcastle's home form is fantastic. Only Liverpool have won here this season, and really Newcastle should have seen that out. But I just wonder, with everything that's gone on over the last 7 days or so, that mood, it feels like a defining period coming up. This feels like a really important game for Newcastle. Like, how do they bounce back from going out of the Champions League in such devastating fashion, but also the previous 2 results against Everton and Tottenham, sorry, they've not performed very well. They're not likely to have too many players back either. So it's going to be a test of Eddie Howe to get these players, up to a level of performance to where they can beat Fulham. How have Fulham suddenly found form? How have they suddenly found their goal-scoring form?
Yeah, well, this is it. I think they always had a level of understanding of how to play under Marco Silva because they did so brilliantly in the Championship when they got promoted 2 years ago, and then last year was really good as well from their standards and kind of adapting. But you lose Alexander Mitrovic over the summer, and it's all anyone could talk about. And Marco Silva was finally, after these last 2 games, like, can people finally stop asking me now because we've proved we can finally do it without him. I think it's a lot of players kind of finding their feet at the same time. Alex Iwobi's playing the best he has so far for us this season. Raul Jimenez has obviously started to score goals as well. Tim Ream has kind of dropped out, and we've had Tosin Adarabioyo and Calvin Bassey as centre backs, and there's a little bit more pace there, which perhaps give Fulham a little bit more of a license to get forward, knowing that they're not going to get caught out, Tim Ream, he's been a fantastic servant for a decade now at Fulham, but he's not the fastest. And playing so much as he was at the start of the season with injuries meant that, Fulham were, they had to be a little bit more conservative, I think. But yeah, what you've seen in the last few games, they did it at Liverpool as well. So it's clearly not something that's limited to the Cottage. They went there and scored 3 goals at Anfield. So, not having to worry too much about getting caught back. They've got Castagna and Robinson and Kenny Tete as well as fullback options who are also very quick and really good at recovery. And then you've got that base in midfield of Palhinha and Harrison Reed, who naturally like to sit a little bit deeper, don't get involved too much in the forward play and let those kind of attackers get on with it. So in a nutshell, I think it's a gelling of new players that came this summer trying to hit their form. And then, a couple of players come back from injury and things start to look a little bit more rosier than perhaps they did off the top of my head when we lost 3-0 at home to Brentford at the start of the season, which I'm still not over.
I can tell. But they seem to be playing without any baggage, seem to be just enjoying their football. And when you can do that as a football club, it is a massive benefit, and it's paying off of all the goals that they are scoring. And you've listed a few players there that Fulham have got. I always ask about the main man that Newcastle United would have to stop. I suspect you could name quite a few, because I'm just thinking about the players that I would love to see in the black and white of Newcastle. Palhinha is one of them. Robinson, I think, is a fantastic fullback. Tom Kearney could do a job as a squad player. And I love Willian as well. I know he's getting on a bit, but I mean, he is tremendous for his age, a really good Premier League player. I'm so glad that he ended up stopping in the Premier League. But who is the main man that Newcastle will have to stop on Saturday?
Well, you're completely right there. I mean, before it was almost the easiest job for any opposition writer ever, just to say Alexander Mitrovic, stick 3 people on him and you'll probably keep Fulham at bay. But now, you're right. And it's not something that I don't think Marco Silva would have planned and said, we don't have maybe a central figure anymore, but it's just been that shared responsibility. So it's difficult to answer your question. I'd probably say João Palhinha, but then I know you want like an attacker that's going to score goals, but Palhinha is just so phenomenal, and it's no surprise that Bayern Munich wanted him so badly in the summer, and they're probably going to come back in for him very soon as well. He just makes everything tick, and he's one of those players that, regardless if you're, whichever club you support, you can always pick out, a supremely talented player like that, and they always do stand out in these kind of teams, I think. But Palhinha is one that will probably go higher up than Fulham. There's probably no doubt about it, and still perform at that level. So stopping him is going to be massive for Newcastle, because when he wants to, which is most of the time, he dictates games, he breaks up play, he gets forward, he's got a goal in him. He is very much a late bloomer. Obviously, he's 27, 28 now, I think, and came to the Premier League quite late. But he's making up for lost time, it seems, because every single time he puts on the Fulham shirt, it's an 8 or a 9 out of 10 performance.
I love watching him. I think he's absolutely tremendous. Doesn't give the opposition midfield any time on the ball, and it is great to see just like a kind of an old-fashioned defensive midfield. I know he says he gets forward, but just someone who can get the foot in and isn't scared of the tackle. And the viewpoint of many Newcastle United fans is that they are lacking that kind of number 6, someone who can dictate the play without advancing too much forward. And I think if Newcastle United fans had the pick of any midfielder, a realistic option, he would potentially be one to arrive in January. Although, as you say, Bayern Munich come knocking, you might end up over in Germany. I mean, we could talk about Harry Wilson all of a sudden finding the back of the net. Alex Iwobi obviously coming from Everton. There's just an abundance of talent there.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's the depth as well, which is really promising to see. You mentioned Harry Wilson, who was fantastic in the Championship, and then maybe last season didn't really get off the ground as much as some of the other players did in the Premier League. But he has talent in abundance. We said about Tom Kearney as well. He's someone who's gone through kind of dips in the last few years. He's struggled with injury, but now he's kind of finding his feet as a player kind of without any shackles. He's been the club captain for ages, and I think in some ways that's limited him. And maybe he's wanted to be more reserved. But the Tom Kearney we've seen in the last couple of weeks, he's playing with freedom. He wants to get the ball up onto his left foot, and I think that Harry Wilson goal against West Ham last time out was the perfect example of that. He wins it in midfield, gets his head up, finds a space, picks the pass, and then lets the forwards do the rest. And I think that's what Fulham have been doing really well recently. Is everyone knows their roles, their structure, and then you've got those players I mentioned before. It was Iwobi, Pereira, and Willian, I think, that started in those 3 midfield roles. But then you have the likes of Harry Wilson and Bobby De Cordova-Reid and Carlos Vinicius as well, all finishers that come on and actually affect the game. So I think they're in a strong position at the moment, and fingers crossed that all those players in rotation can keep kind of producing in the way they have.
That's something Newcastle just don't have at the moment. You know, the luxury to rotate, and we saw it impact, especially in this last week against AC Milan. Eddie Howe was able to bring Sean Longstaff off the bench. Callum Wilson started in place of Isaac Damburn came back, but you could kind of see. Have you got a little four-legged friend there with you?
I do have my little Dashan with me. Yeah, I might have to while he goes crazy. Do you want me to put him downstairs?
We just had a little interlude there because Mark's lovely little dog was making a bit of an appearance. Lovely little dog called Pebble. So thank you to the postman for that perfectly timed drop of the letters. I was just complaining, Mark, about Newcastle's inability to switch things up because of the injuries. Against AC Milan, we had Sean Longstaff back. We had Dan Burn involved, Callum Wilson starting. So a few players starting to come back from injury, but you looked at them and you thought, they're not fit. You know, they're especially not match fit. They might be ready to be involved, and I can't really see much changing over the next 2 days or so. Anthony Gordon comes off, was subbed off because he picked up a knock. Kieran Trippier can't play because he's suspended. So things aren't looking too good for Newcastle. I'm trying to find a bit of positivity because I've talked up Fulham so much, but I am feeling rather nervous about Saturday. I guess one thing that you could hope for from Newcastle point of view, and one thing that Marco Silva will potentially be very wary of, is kind of that wounded animal reaction. You know, they've gone out of the Champions League, they've missed out on the Europa League from a position in which they really shouldn't have done, considering with half an hour ago they were pretty much in control of that game. So hopefully Newcastle, on Saturday, they want to really put everything behind them this week because it has been a horrible week, and Marco Silva will be hoping that Newcastle aren't that wounded animal kind of type.
Yeah, absolutely. And I watched the AC Milan game as well. And like you said, it was towards the end there, and you're bringing on players, and you're thinking they're not making enough of an impact, are they, in terms of getting fit and being ready for that. Lovely to see former Fulham player Dan Burn come on, though. We loved him during his time at Craven Cottage. So hopefully it'll be good to see him on this game. But yeah, like you said, it's one of the biggest fears I always think as well is that kind of bounce back ability, and especially away from home. Maybe it would be different if Newcastle were coming to Craven Cottage, because I think it would, maybe we could carry on that form. But I can see this being hopefully not a boring game, because Fulham have a kind of tendency that if it's a boring game, they'll concede late on, which is what we seem to do all the time at St James's, like I said earlier. But no, I completely see that. And I think there's quality enough in the team still. I know suspensions and injuries, and it's nowhere near the first 11. But you've got to hope, or Eddie Howe has got to hope, that this is the time that you really see some character from his players. And like you said, it's been a difficult week for them, and they've got to get back on it. There's still a long way to go in the season. There's no option for them to kind of sign out now at all with all the things that are ahead of them in the season. So I think Marco Silva will be very aware of that. But Fulham are one of the teams under Marco Silva that don't change for anyone, which is something that, as a fan, you love to see. It's usually reserved for the clubs at the very top of the table who can afford to play that kind of style and never change because they don't need to. But it's something that, it's been fantastic for us. We've been able to, every game we go to, we know we're going to put it in. We might lose 4-3 at Anfield, but, I think a lot of Fulham fans would take that as opposed to getting creamed 2-0 where you just sit back and absorb shots. So I'm expecting it to be a really entertaining game. It could be quite open as well. And hopefully we get a lot of goals, which is seemingly what Fulham fans get a lot of recently, which I'm not going to get bored of saying for a while. But yeah, I think it's really poised quite nicely. If we were going to go up there at any point, then, in the midst of an injury crisis, getting knocked out of Europe, it's probably the best time we could go up there, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. So it sounds like, though, you're expecting Fulham to take the game to Newcastle?
I think you have to. I can't see us going there and sitting back based on all the things we've just said about injuries and suspensions and these kind of things and fitness. I think they really, if they want to get 3 points, they've got to go for it. There's simply no other option for them. And I think based on the last few games as well, I think Marco Silva would be crazy to put the handbrake on now after what we've seen, after the points that Fulham have managed to take at home. I'm sure he's thinking, right, well, let's go and try this out on the road and see what we can come up with. And if they can go and get a result, I mean, a draw would be fantastic. I think that would be a massive result for Fulham. But given the circumstances, I think Fulham fans would be quite annoyed if we went up there and watched the team sit back against this Newcastle side. I think they've got more to give them that.
Well, it certainly will be an interesting game. I'm hoping that there's not many goals in it, and Newcastle can. I'll take a 1-0 win like last season. To be fair, I remember being an absolute terrible game. It was the Mitrovic double foot penalty, wasn't it? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
so it had that.
When you mentioned it earlier, I thought, "Oh, we're going to get onto that Mitrovic stuff." Yeah, but yes, it was.
That.
Yeah. That was another tough result as well.
In terms of Fulham's main weakness, I know you guys are riding high, but come on, share the secret. What's their main weakness?
Well, I think our defence is quite good against kind of physical players. I think we seem to hold our own quite well when it's a bit of a scrap. We've got a lot of players in there that can handle themselves. João Palhinha in the box, and he does fine. But then the centre backs we do have, Tim Ream, Mr. Diop, Calvin Bassey, they're all big guys. They're all fine. When teams kind of get intricate with it and pass it around, it's not something that we deal terribly with, but it's definitely probably the weak point of the back four. I think you've got full-backs that like to bomb forward. You've got centre-backs who, although are quite mobile, perhaps aren't the most technically gifted at reading the game. And we've seen them cut open a couple of times. Even against West Ham in that 5-0 win, there was a few moments where kind of the ball fell to Jared Bowen where there was no one anywhere near him. So I think it's about being able to be concentrated for 90 minutes. And Marco Silva says to the players all the time, you've got to be the most switched on when you've got the ball, because it's the way that Fulham get countered on and teams can pass around them quite quickly, where they look really, where they're running back towards their own goal and they kind of look a bit stressed and a bit worried. So I'd say that's probably the thing that you'd be most worried about, especially if, like I said, I'm expecting them to kind of try and play a little bit more expansively and try and get out into Newcastle's half. Then I'd say that is the worry. And with players, well, I was going to say players like Anthony Gordon, maybe not so much, but there are still players in that team that are more than capable of picking a pass and being able to thread Fulham open, maybe on a counter scenario.
Yeah, I think Newcastle, what they have to do on Saturday is get an early goal and kind of try and put the game to bed in the first half, because as the game wears on, they get tired, they get fatigued, and that's when the opposition can really hurt them. And they've been defending very poorly of late. Losing Nick Pope hasn't helped. The defence doesn't look organised. It looks a little bit chaotic. But fingers crossed from Newcastle's point of view, they can continue what has been a great run at home in the Premier League. And goodness knows they do need a win. On Marco Silva, is there a bit more of a connection now, you think, Mark, between the fans and the manager, given that he turned down the riches of Saudi Arabia? Because, I mean, that saga ran on and on and on and on. There were some big figures being mentioned and trying to get him over to Saudi Arabia, but he turned it down and he's in the dugout and working miracles at the Cottage.
Yeah, it's probably the best scenario he could have had. No one wants to lose their top striker over the summer, but I think for Marco, having that whole Mitrovic saga going on whilst he was also being courted, perhaps made it a little bit easier, especially in terms of the fans and being able to, okay, Mitrovic is going, that's a shame, but I'm sticking around. I think that was a big thing for a lot of fans, and we've had our fair share of going through managers as every club does, and so when you do find one that not only works with the football side of things but also really resonates with the fans, you never want to lose them, do you? So I was really worried over the summer that he might go, not even to Saudi Arabia. I thought for a minute that Spurs were going to come in for him. There was talks about that before they got Ange Postecoglou and other clubs, but we call him a genius because he is a genius. He's done things at Fulham that very, very few managers have ever done for us before, even in our best days of getting to the Europa League final and consistently being in the Premier League. I don't think we ever played football quite as nice and attacking in some stages that we have under Marco Silva. So we're thrilled to have him, and his stock couldn't really be much higher at the moment, to be honest.
I just love how happy you are. I mean, I don't love it 2 days before Newcastle.
Actually, I'll tell you, after all these years of watching Fulham, they don't always make me this happy.
Well, hopefully Newcastle wipe the smile off your face.
I'm
Mark.
sure you and all your listeners are hoping to do that. Don't worry.
Keeping everything crossed. I've mentioned, it feels like I'm mentioning it every single opportunity I get, the injury crisis. But who are you most worried about from Newcastle point of view? Is the one player that stands out? Like you say, Anthony Gordon might be the man you would choose, but he hasn't looked himself of late, and we wait and see whether he does indeed miss out, Eddie Howe's press conference will be on Friday morning, and we'll hopefully get an update then. But is there a player that you're fearing?
Well, I said earlier about the midfield battle that I thought was probably going to be the big thing with João Palhinha. So I guess I'd probably have to pick a Newcastle midfielder. Bruno is obviously one that, seen him up close a fair few times that worries me. And you've got Callum Wilson as well. Plays further forward. That I don't know why about what it is about Callum. I love him. I think he's a fantastic striker. I loved him at all his previous clubs. And when he went to Newcastle, I thought brilliant. I was really excited to see him play. I don't want Isak to do well after what he did for us last time. But no, I'd say, it's the spine of the team for me, and it always has been. I know there's some nice flair players that play out wide, and Miguel Almiron. I used to cover Crystal Palace, and I don't know if you remember the goal he scored against Palace at home a few years ago. It seems like he always seems to turn up whenever I'm covering a game that he plays in. But there are quite a few, and like you said, even though there's an injury crisis, you can still pick an abundance of quality in that team. So probably through the spine, I'd say with Bruno.
Yeah, the midfield battle will certainly be key, you would think. All that remains to be done then, Mark, is to get your prediction. How is Saturday going to go?
Well, I've come on these podcasts covering different clubs that aren't the team I support, and I'm always very, very smart with my predictions. I never like to go crazy with them. I always go quite sensible. But with Fulham, all the rules go out the window for me. So, we've won 5-0 in our last 2 games. I'm just going to go 5-0 again, I think.
Do you know what? I am fearing the realistic outcome of this game, and that scoreline I think is maybe within the realms of possibility because of everything that's gone on. And I'm sorry to our listeners, to my listeners, you'll be thinking this is the last thing I need to hear after Newcastle jumped out at you. But I am feeling down, and hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully you're wrong. But I can see Fulham winning on Saturday, and I can see them winning by quite a few goals. Maybe not 5-0, but I can certainly see Newcastle conceding 2 or 3. Because I just think this is probably going to be a game too far for them. And that's not what I want to say, and not what I want to see, given they've got Chelsea in the League Cup on Wednesday. And, the festive period is coming in thick and fast. But hopefully my down in the dumps mood, my negativity doesn't ring true. And hopefully, Mark, your prediction doesn't ring true. But I think I'll be feeling like a lot of Newcastle United fans are right now. But hopefully Newcastle United can pick up a win against Fulham on Saturday. Thank you, Mark, for popping onto the podcast. Much appreciated. And to you guys listening, please hit subscribe and follow through whichever platform you join us on, and head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news.